fired the man who saved my life.
The young man needs to wait for the public comment period.
I've been waiting 6 weeks. My dad's been waiting 9 years. That's his. You made him hand it in at the gate because he's not allowed on the property anymore. So I'm handing it in. And then one of you is going to look at me and tell me why.
Son, I'm going to ask your attorney to speak for you. This is a safety review. It has rules.
It's a review about a ride that didn't stop.
Your ride is supposed to click. When the bar comes down, it clicks, and the click means the machine has you. Mine didn't click, and the man you fired is the reason I'm sitting in this chair instead of lying in the ground. Somebody in the room let out a breath, low and sorry, the sound a crowd makes when it has decided a child is being brave about something it cannot help him with. A woman 2 seats down from Frayne looked at the boy with wet eyes and did nothing, which was worse than if she had laughed. His mother half rose from the folding chairs at the back. Micah. Just his name. A plea in it. Micah Ordway did not turn around. 9 years my dad greased your cars and checked your bars every morning before the gates opened, he said. He filed a paper 3 times this summer that said the Peregrine wasn't stopping right. You've got the papers. And when it finally didn't stop with me in it, he put his whole hand on the emergency brake, and you fired him for touching it. He looked from face to face down the table. So I'm not here for the public comment period. I'm here because you're about to open that ride again in 2 days, and there's going to be another kid in my seat. Here is the room, a board of 11 adults in good chairs. A chairman who straightens a folder instead of answering a child. A ride called the Peregrine, closed for 6 weeks and scheduled to reopen for the holiday weekend, its restraints certified safe on a state form. And a boy in a wheelchair who had come to say the one thing nobody at that table wanted said out loud, that the machine had stopped clicking on purpose. 2 days. That was the clock over all of it. Malcolm Frayne had run parks for 30 years, and he believed, sincerely, in the numbers. A ride was safe when the certificate said safe. An incident was an operator's error when the report said operator error. Feelings did not appear on a spreadsheet, and a spreadsheet was the only document Frayne fully trusted, because a spreadsheet had never once cried in his office. You'll have your comment period, Frayne said. In order. Miss Vogt, you represent the family. A woman near the front stood. Adrienne Vogt had taken this case for nothing, because she had a nephew who loved coasters, and because the more she read the discovery, the less she slept. We do, Mr. Chairman. And before this board votes to reopen the Peregrine, the family asks it to look at 3 things it has not looked at together. The maintenance tickets Silas Ordway filed, the ride's control history for this season, and 1 photograph. The incident has been reviewed by the state, said the company's lawyer, a smooth man named Gerald Pine. Ride certificate R388, reissued. The cause was a manual emergency stop initiated without authorization by Mr. Ordway. Tragically, that stop is what injured the boy. We grieve for this family, but we cannot rebuild a safety record around a father's understandable panic. His panic, Micah said. Say the other part. Say what would have happened if he panicked 1 second later. The room went quiet, because everyone in it had read the same report and skipped the same paragraph. Recess, Frayne said after a moment, and his voice was still smooth, but he squared the folder again, which was the only tell he had. 15 minutes. Ms. Vogt, if the family wants those documents in the record, the clerk will take them. But this board votes today. We open Friday. You need to understand what the Peregrine was and what they had done to it. And it is not complicated once somebody says it plainly, which is exactly why nobody at Kestrel Peak had ever said it plainly. A roller coaster keeps you in your seat with a restraint, a bar, a harness that latches when it comes down. On the Peregrine, every restraint had a sensor, and the sensors talked to the ride's computer, and the computer had one job that mattered more than all its other jobs combined. If a restraint anywhere on the train read unlatched, the computer would not release the train, and if the train was already moving, the computer would bring it to a controlled stop before the first drop. That was the whole promise of the machine. That was the click, turned into code. Silas Ordway had checked those sensors by hand every morning for 9 years, because he was the kind of man who did not trust a light without also pulling on the bar. But a stop costs money. Not in dollars, you can see. In throughput, the number of riders the Peregrine moved per hour, which fed the number of dollars each guest spent per visit, which fed the only chart Malcolm Frayne read on Monday mornings. And a restraint sensor, it turns out, throws a lot of faults that are nothing. A harness a half-inch shy of full travel, a sensor gummed with funnel cake grease, a big rider settling wrong. Every one of those nothing faults used to stop the train, clear the line, and cost the park 90 seconds and a chorus of groans. So the winter before, Larkspur's operations division pushed a software update. It reclassified a whole tier of restraint faults from critical halt to advisory, log and proceed. On paper, it was a tuning fix, a way to cut nuisance stops. In the machine, it meant this. The Peregrine would now roll a train over the first drop with a restraint reading unlatched, as long as the fault fell in the reclassified tier, and it would simply write a line in a log nobody read. The park's stop rate fell 40% that season. In the quarterly deck, under a green arrow, it was called Availability Improvement. At the summer all-hands, Frayne had praised the operations team for the best uptime in the Peregrine's history. People applauded. Silas Ordway did not applaud. Silas Ordway pulled the log, saw trains dispatching over faults that would have stopped them a year before, and filed a maintenance ticket. Then another, then a third. Each one came back stamped with the same 3 words, which is the sound a company makes when it wants a problem to stop being written down. No action required. 6 weeks before the day that put his son in a wheelchair, a girl's harness had popped up on the Peregrine's lift hill. A second operator, an old hand, had slammed the manual brake out of pure reflex and stopped the train on the incline, and the girl had been fine, shaking but fine, and the park had comped the family season passes and an NDA and moved the operator to parking lot tram duty within the week. The incident got a number, IR 206, and a folder, and the folder went into a drawer, and the drawer was in an office 2 floors below the room where the board now sat, deciding whether to open the ride again on Friday. That was the thing they were all being so careful not to look at together. Not one missing bolt. A decision, made in a heated room in the off-season, to teach a safety machine to stop asking the one question it existed to ask. During the recess, Adrienne Vogt found the Ordways in a side room with vending machines, and she got down on her heel in front of the wheelchair so she was under the boys' eyes, not over them. Micah, I need to hear it from you again. The order of it. The stop, and then the hurt. Because the whole company is going to stand on that order, and I need it to be exactly true. It's exactly true. Micah's hands were flat on his knees. We went up the lift, me and Sawyer, and at the top, before the drop, my bar came up, just a little, enough that I slid. And I remember thinking, it didn't click. It never clicked. And then everything yanked backward, hard, like a car crash. And I hit the bar with my back, and then I couldn't feel my legs. He said the last part the way you report weather. If it hadn't yanked, I'd have gone over the drop with the bar up. Sawyer says the whole car screamed. I don't remember screaming. I remember it didn't click. Silas Ordway stood against the wall with his arms crossed. A big, quiet man who had not said 10 words since he arrived, because he was not allowed within 100 feet of the property, and had signed a paper promising it and had come anyway to sit in the back and watch his son do the thing he was forbidden to do. "Mr. Ordway," Vog said, "the board's going to say your emergency stop caused his injury. Medically, they're not wrong. The stop is what broke his back." "I know what the stop did." Silas's voice was low and even. "I was the one holding the brake." "Then I need you to be able to say the rest of it, out loud, in front of him." Silas looked at the floor for a while. "His bar was up," he said finally. "I saw the fault board go red on car 3, and I saw his hair over the top of the seat, and the bar was up. And I had about a second. I could let it ride and pray the fault was a false one, or I could put the train into the brakes and no, I was going to hurt whoever was loose in that car." He looked at his son. "I couldn't do both, Micah. I could keep you alive or I could keep you whole. There wasn't a version where I got to do both. I've run that second about 10,000 times and it always only has the 2 doors. "I know, Dad," Micah said. "That's the whole reason I'm here. They want everybody to think you had a bad door and a good door. You didn't. You had 2 bad ones and you took the one that left me alive. That was the piece the company was counting on, no one being able to hold in their head. That the man who hurt the boy and the man who saved the boy were the same man in the same second, and that the thing which forced that second on him was sitting 2 floors down in a drawer marked IR 206. Back in the room, Vog did not argue physics. She asked the board to hear from the one person left at the park who had been on the Peregrine's platform that season and still had her job. Her name was Paige Corliss, and she was 20, and she had run the load platform on the Peregrine for 2 summers, and she came in through the side door already looking like she wanted to leave through it. "Miss Corliss," Vog said, "this season's, did the Peregrine stop for restraint faults the way it used to?" Paige glanced once at the table, at Frayne, at Gerald Pine, then back at her own hands. "No," she said quietly. "It used to stop all the time. Little stuff. This year it just didn't. We were told the sensors got retuned. Better software. On the day Micah Ordway was hurt, what did you see on the fault board?" "Car 3, restraint advisory." Her voice was barely there. "Red line. I saw it and I froze because a year ago, that's a halt. The train doesn't move. And this year it's just a line." And then Silas hit the brake from the control booth and everything. She stopped. "I saw the red line. I saw it before the train hit the brakes. It was red before he touched anything." "Before," Vog repeated. "So the machine already knew the restraint was open. And the machine did nothing. And the man did the thing the machine was built to do." "Objection to the characterization," said Pine. "It's not a courtroom, Mr. Pine," Vog said. "There's nothing to object to. There's only a board about to open a ride, and a girl who just told them it stopped stopping." Adrienne Vogt was not finished with the platform. She called the man who had trained Silas Ordway, a maintenance foreman named Ward Buckley, 26 years, at Kestrel Peak, who came to the front with a folder of his own and did not wait to be asked what was in it. "These are copies of the 3 tickets Silas filed this season." Buckley laid them on the table one at a time, like cards. "Ride won't hard stop on Tier 2 restraint faults. That's May. Ticket 2, June. Same thing, with the log pages stapled to it. 6 dispatches over open restraint advisories in a single week. Ticket 3, July. Everyone came back the same. No action required." He set the last one down. "Mr. Pine called these self-serving this morning. I trained the man. Silas Ordway filed a ticket the day somebody parked a stroller too close to an exit gate. He filed one when a Q fan blew a fuse. He is the single most annoying man about small safety things I have worked beside in 26 years, and I mean that as the highest praise I have. And he was filing these months before he had any lawsuit to be self-serving about." Buckley looked down the length of the table. "You didn't fire a disgruntled mechanic. You fired your smoke detector for going off. Odette Wills, the newest member of the board, leaned into her microphone. "I'd like to hear from the young man himself, Mr. Chairman, if you'll permit it." Not his attorney. Him. Frayne permitted it, because refusing would have looked like precisely what it was. "Tell us about the ride, Mr. Ordway," Will said. "Your own words." "We went up the lift chain." Click, click, click. That sound the chain makes. Micah's hands stayed flat on his knees. At the top there's a flat part before the drop, and that's where my bar came up. Not all the way off. Just up. I pushed down on it with both hands, because you're supposed to hear it click when it's really locked, and it never clicked the whole ride. I figured that was normal because I'm a kid. I figured the machine knew what it was doing. He drew a breath. Sawyer was next to me yelling to hold on. Then the whole train slammed, and I went into the bar, and after that, my legs were just gone. Not hurting. Gone. He looked at Wills, and then, on purpose, at Frayne. Everybody keeps telling me my dad's break hurt me. It did. But I want the true order said out loud in this room one time. The bar came up. The machine did nothing. Then my dad stopped it. He was the third thing that happened. Your machine was the first, and the first thing did nothing at all. When Micah finished, the room was very still. And Odette Wills wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. Frayne let none of it move his face. "Note the testimony," he said. "We'll get to the software review in the operations report." "Ms. Vogt, you mentioned a photograph." "I did," Vogt said. "We're still locating the original. The family will submit it before the vote." "The vote is today." Then the family asks the board not to vote blind. They broke for the afternoon, and the vote did not happen at 5 o'clock. And Malcolm Frayne walked back to his office with his folder squared under his arm and made one telephone call that he would later swear, under oath, had only ever been about media strategy. "The Corliss girl put the timing on the record," he said, to a man whose title was Vice President of Operations and Safety, a man named Gordon Estes. And the mother's lawyer is chasing a ride photo. Gordon Estes had built the Peregrine's restraint monitoring system 22 years before, when he was a young engineer and the ride was new, and it had been the proudest thing he ever made. A machine that would physically refuse, to hurt a child through simple neglect. He had spent 2 decades keeping it honest. And 2 winters ago he had sat in a heated conference room and let Malcolm Frayne's throughput numbers talk him into signing the patch that taught his own machine to look away. "There's no ride photo," Estes said. "The concessionaire's system purges after 90 days. That window's closed." "Make sure it's closed," Frayne said. "And Gordon, the operator error finding holds. The state signed it. We don't reopen a settled cause because a boy is sympathetic. You know what happens to this company if the cause changes. You know the number." "I know the number," Estes said. "Then hold the line and we open Friday, and in a year no one remembers a thing." Frayne set the phone down gently, the way a careful man sets down anything he might need again. And that is worth sitting with for a second, because it is the whole shape of how a machine gets its teeth pulled and no one's fingerprints end up on the pliers. Malcolm Frayne never disabled a sensor. He never pushed a patch or purged a photo or moved a witness to tram duty. He read a chart and he praised a number and he said, "Hold the line," into a telephone, and 11 layers of other people turned those calm words into a train that rolled over an open bar with a 12-year-old inside it. The chairman's hands, when the boy finally looked at them across the table, would be the cleanest hands in the room. That was not an accident. That was the product. The next day a courier left a large envelope with the Ordway's neighbor, since the family was at the hospital for Micah's afternoon therapy, and the envelope was from the company that administered Silas Ordway's severance. And, through it, the health plan that was paying for the boy's care. It was very polite. It regretted to inform the family that Mr. Ordway's separation from Kestrel Peak had triggered a review of continued benefit eligibility, and that pending arbitration of the wrongful termination claim, coverage for ongoing rehabilitation may be subject to interruption. It named no threat. It simply set two facts side by side on company letterhead: the boy's therapy and the father's lawsuit. And let the family understand on their own that the same hand held both. Colleen Ordway read it at the kitchen table that night and put her face in her hands. "Take the settlement, Silas," she said. "They offered enough to cover him for years. If the coverage stops in the middle of his rehab—" Her voice broke. "I can't gamble his legs on a lawsuit. I can't. I'm his mother. I can't." "They're doing that on purpose," Silas said. "Tonight. That's the point of the letter." "I know it's the point of the letter." She looked up at him, furious and terrified at once. "That doesn't make it not work." And it was Micah, at the end of the table in his chair, who broke it, because the boy had been thinking about the machine longer than either of them. "Mom, if we take their money, we sign the paper that says it was Dad's fault. And then in 2 days, they open the ride, and the software's still like that. And the next kid's bar comes up. And there's no operator anymore who files the ticket, because they fired the one who did." He rolled a little closer to her. "They're not paying us for my legs. They're paying us to hand them the next kid. I'd rather be in this chair and know I didn't do that." Colleen looked at her son for a long time. Then she folded the letter in half, and in half again, and set it under the sugar bowl, which in that house was where you put a thing you had decided not to be afraid of yet. Adrienne Vogt found the 6-week girl by pulling on a number, because a report number is a thread if you tug it. IR 206 had a date. 6 weeks before Micah Ordway's ride, on a Saturday, a family had walked off the Peregrine, shaking, and been handed season passes 3 days later without paying for them, and passes leave a record, and the record had a name: Renata Doyle, whose 10-year-old, Katie, had felt her lap bar rise on that same lift hill, grabbed the arm of the stranger next to her, and screamed, and had been saved by an operator's reflex and a manual brake, the very reflex Silas would use 6 weeks after, the very brake the machine no longer pulled on its own. Vogt did not have to convince Renata Doyle of anything. She only had to knock. "I signed a paper," Renata Doyle said in her doorway, not yet stepping back to let the lawyer in. "It says if I talk about what happened to my daughter, I owe them money I don't have. They were very nice about it. A man brought the passes and the paper to the hospital in the same folder." Her jaw was set. "I signed it because Katie was fine and I was terrified, and they swore it was a 1-in-a-million sensor fluke, already fixed." She looked past Vogt at nothing. "Then I saw the boy, in the chair, on the news, and I did the arithmetic on already fixed." "You don't have to talk to me," Vogt said. "I can't promise they won't come after you over that paper. My little girl grabbed a stranger on a roller coaster because the bar lifted off her legs, and they handed me a folder to make sure the next mother would never hear about it." Renata Doyle stepped back and opened the door the rest of the way. "There's a boy who never got to hear about it. He's 12, come in. I'll tell you all of it, and I'll say it to their faces, and they can mail me whatever bill they like." She meant it. When the board reconvened, Renata Doyle sat in the second row with a folded agreement in her lap that could take everything she owned, and she did not let go of it, and she did not look away from the table once. Adrienne Vogt spent the next day building the one part of the case the company could not send a letter about, and it was Micah who handed her the thread, from the passenger seat of the van on the way to therapy. "The camera on the drop," he said. "It takes everybody's picture, right at the top, before you go down." There was a flash. I remember the flash because my bar was already up and I was thinking, don't take my picture like this. They'll say the photo's gone, Micah. The park purges them. The park does. But it's not the park's camera. It's the picture company. The kiosk by the exit. He was working it, the way he worked everything, one gear at a time. And when you come in the gate, you scan your wristband, and if you scan it, the picture gets sent to your account so you'll buy it later. I scanned mine. Sawyer scanned his. Everybody scans, that's the whole thing. They want you to buy the picture. He looked at her. So there's a picture of car 3 at the top of the lift, 1 second before, sent to my account, on the picture company's computers, not the park's. And it's got my bar in it. Adrienne Vogt pulled the van over, because you do not drive while your hands are shaking. Micah, she said, the park can delete their copy all day. They can't reach into the vendor's account system and unsend a photo to a customer's login. If you scan that wristband, there is a full resolution image of your restraint sitting in a database with a timestamp on a server the park doesn't own. She started the van again. We are going to that kiosk company before the park thinks to. And it was Micah who made the call from the therapy waiting room, because it was his account and his photo, and the vendor's helpline wanted to verify the account holder, and the account holder was a 12-year-old who read them, his own wristband number, off a bracelet he still hadn't taken off. He sat in a plastic chair with the phone against his ear and his father beside him, and he stayed polite through 4 transfers. And when a supervisor finally said the originals were unavailable due to a storage migration, Micah said, "That's all right. I'm not asking for your copy. I'm asking you to confirm you emailed a copy to my account the day of, because your own terms of service say you do it automatically. And I've still got that email." There was a long silence on the line, and then the supervisor asked him to hold. Silas watched his son negotiate with a corporation from a rehab waiting room and did not say a word, because there was nothing to add to it, and because the boy was doing, in a plastic chair, the exact thing his father had been fired for, refusing to let a machine's convenient silence stand as an answer. But the machine had a day's head start, and it used it. By the morning of the board's final session, the company had built a wall, and the wall was made of things that were technically true. Silas Ordway's 3 maintenance tickets were entered. And then Gerald Pine stood and called them what a guilty man's paper always gets called: self-serving. A disgruntled mechanic, Pine said, documenting a grievance he could sue over later. The board had them, but the board had also just been handed a reason not to trust them. The photo vendor, when the state's own investigator finally called, reported that the high-resolution originals for that date had been lost in a storage migration and could produce only a low-resolution thumbnail from a cache, in which the top of car 3 was a smear of morning glare, and you could argue, if you wanted to argue, that the bar was down. And Paige Corliss, who had said before I froze, because a year ago that's a halt, did not come back to say it again. She sent a signed statement instead. It said she had been mistaken about the sequence and confused under the stress of a traumatic day, and that she could not, in good conscience, be certain what the fault board had shown. And it was witnessed by a notary whose address was the same as a Larkspur regional office, and she had a new job now, in another state, that had started very suddenly. Adrienne Vogt did not chase her. She had seen what was under the Ordway sugar bowl, and she knew what a 20-year-old with a rent payment and a phone call from a lawyer looks like when the same weight comes down on her. And there was no version of breaking Paige Corliss open in that room. That did not just leave a second frightened kid in the company's ledger. So by mid-morning, the case was upside down. The tickets were a grudge. The photo was a smear. The one witness had unremembered it. And the company's independent inspection, commissioned by the company, paid by the company, delivered on the company's timeline, declared the Peregrine's restraint system compliant and safe for operation, and rested the boy's injury squarely on the unauthorized stop, which meant on Silas, which meant the ride was clean and the man was the flaw. Malcolm Frayne let a full minute pass so the board could feel the settledness of it, the relief of a hard thing turning out to have an easy answer. "I think we've been thorough," Frayne said. "I'll entertain a motion to reopen the Peregrine, effective Friday, and to close the review with the state's finding intact." "Second," said a man to his right, before anyone else could breathe, and Micah Ordway, in the back next to his mother, put his hand up. Not high, not shaking, just up, The way you raise your hand when you actually have the answer and you are tired of the room, pretending the question is hard. I've got the picture, he said. The room turned, not the smeary one, the real one. He rolled himself up the aisle, and Adrienne Vogt walked beside him with a laptop open in both hands, like something that might spill. You went to the picture company and they said the good ones got lost in a storage thing. And that's true. The ones on their sales server got lost. Real convenient. He stopped at the front. But when you scan your wristband, the picture doesn't just go to the sales server. It gets emailed to you, right away. A big one, so it looks good and you'll want to buy it. It came to my account the second we crested the lift. It's been in my email for 6 weeks the whole time, while everybody said it was gone. He looked up at the chairman. You can't delete something out of a kid's inbox. You didn't even know the kid had it. Adrienne Vogt turned the laptop around and set it on the board table, facing them, and it was full resolution. And it was lit by the flat, clear light of a summer morning at the top of a lift hill, and there was no glare and no smear. There were 4 children in the car 3, arms up, mouths open, in the last happy half-second of an ordinary day at a park. And over the 3rd seat, plain as a broken promise, the lap bar stood up off the boy's thighs at an angle no latched bar can reach. A hand's width of daylight under it, and the boy beneath it was grinning at a camera, arms in the air, because he did not know yet, because the machine that was built to know had been taught not to tell him, that nothing at all was holding him in. Nobody at the table said a word. Somewhere in the back, Colleen Ordway made a sound and pressed her hand over her own mouth. That was taken a second before my dad hit the brake, Micah said into the silence. The timestamp's right there. His hand wasn't on it yet. So whatever you want to say, my dad did. He did it after this. This is the ride. This is what your safe machine sent me. An open bar and a 100-foot drop, and it took my picture and let me go. Malcolm Frayne looked at the photograph for exactly as long as it took him to decide it was survivable. A single anomalous restraint reading, he said, on a system that logs many thousands a season, is not evidence of... Read the board your own slide, Mr. Frayne. Adrienne Vogt laid a printed page beside the laptop. 3rd quarter operations review. You presented it to this body. Peregrine stop rate down 40% year over year. You called it. And I'm reading the minutes of this board. The best uptime in the ride's history. You stood in front of these 11 people and you were proud of it. She set 2 fingers beside the daylight, under the boy's bar. This is what 40% fewer stops looks like from the seat. You didn't make the ride safer this season. You taught it to stop stopping, and then you gave the team a bonus for the silence. That is a distortion of, it's your slide. It's your word. Uptime. She let the word sit in the room. A restraint monitor's whole purpose is downtime. The stops are the product. You painted a green arrow on the one thing the machine existed to do, and you called it a cost you'd cut. And then a man stood up at the far end of the board table. A man who had not spoken all morning. A heavy-set man in his 60s with an engineer's reading glasses, pushed up on his forehead, and Gordon Estes put both hands flat on the wood to keep them steady. He's telling the truth, Estes said. I can tell you exactly why that bar is up in that photograph. Because I know precisely what that machine did and did not do. Because I built it. He was not looking at the boy. He was looking at Malcolm Frayne. And 2 winters ago, I signed the change that told it to do this. Gordon, Frayne said, quietly, a warning inside a name. 22 years ago, I designed that restraint monitor so it could not send a train over that drop with an open bar. It would sit on the brakes and take the groans and the short lines, and it would not move. That was the entire point of me. Estes's voice was thick. And you brought me a chart, Malcolm, and you showed me the stop rate, and you told me the nuisance halts were killing the season, and I signed the reclassification. I turned my own machine's answer from no into log it and go. I told myself it was fine because the faults in that tier were almost always nothing. He finally looked at the boy. 6 weeks before this young man, a girl's bar came up on that same lift, and an operator caught it by hand, and we gave the family passes and a paper, and we buried it in a drawer, and I let it stay buried. Because if it came up next to my signature. Report number IR 206. It's 2 floors under us right now. I've known it was down there every single day, and I have not slept a full night since. The woman near the end of the table, Odette Wills, said, very evenly, Mr. Estes, are you telling this board that management knew the Peregrine would dispatch trains over open restraints and had a documented near fatality proving it before this child was injured? I'm telling you I knew, Estes said. I'm the one who's supposed to know. And I let a man who filed 3 tickets get fired for pulling the brake. I taught the machine to stop pulling itself. He took his glasses off his forehead and set them on the table, gently, like a man laying down a tool he no longer had the right to hold. My granddaughter has a season pass. She rides the Peregrine most Saturdays. I signed a change that would have let her go over that drop with the bar up and taken her picture doing it. I have sat in every one of these meetings and voted to keep the number green. I'm done. Reopen that ride on Friday and it opens over my resignation and my sworn statement. And I'll give both to the state this afternoon. And the whole board stood up, not for a vote. There was no motion on the floor. They stood the way people stand when the floor of a thing they believed drops out from under them all at once. 1, and then 3, and then the length of the table. 11 adults on their feet in a room where a boy in a wheelchair sat perfectly still, because he had said it in the first 30 seconds, and it had taken them an hour and a photograph and an old engineer's confession to finally hear the sentence he walked in with. Malcolm Frayne stayed in his chair. He squared his folder one more time, and it did not help him, because a squared folder is only useful in a room that is still pretending, and the room had stopped pretending. This board is not equipped to adjudicate, he began. No, said Odette Wills, still standing. It's not. Which is why the Peregrine does not open Friday, or any day, until the Attorney General and the federal safety regulators have that photograph, that software change, and report IR 206 in their hands. And I will be walking all 3 across the street myself before this building closes tonight. And I am calling for the chairman's immediate suspension pending that review. She looked down the table. All in favor stand where you are. They were already standing. It did not end with Malcolm Frayne, because a thing this size never fits in one man's hands. That is the reason it is built to spread. There was a state legislator named Cliff Doran, whose committee had quietly softened the amusement ride inspection statute 2 sessions running, and whose campaign had been generous with Larkspur money, and who had made the reclassification of advisory faults legal in the first place. And there was Bram Sowell, the state's chief ride safety inspector, who had reissued certificate R388 in a single afternoon without ever pulling the season's fault logs, and who had signed off on the burial of IR 206 as a non-reportable near event. 1 man to run the numbers, 1 man to write the law that let the numbers stand, and 1 man to stamp the paper that called it all safe. It always takes the 3 of them. That is what makes it so hard to see and so easy to do. No single one of them ever has to feel like the one who did it. Silas Ordway got his name back on a Tuesday in a letter from the state that reversed the operator error finding and reinstated his certification, and the wrongful termination arbitration settled within the month. And Larkspur Entertainment paid a number that Malcolm Frayne had spent the whole affair trying to avoid, and it was still cheaper than what the company had cut from the value of a single park by that season's throughput. Frayne was not arrested that week. Men like Frayne are rarely arrested in weeks. They are arrested in years by the patient assembly of documents. But the federal file opened, and the file was thick, because the one thing a company obsessed with metrics can never stop doing is keeping records. and the records of the peregrine were a confession written in timestamps by people who thought they were writing efficiency reports. Here's the part that is hard to get through cleanly, so I will just tell it to you straight. The week they fired Silas Ordway, before the lawsuit, before the board, when he was just a man who had been told he was the reason his son couldn't walk, he did not sit down and grieve. He went to the hardware store with the last of a paycheck and he built a ramp to the front door of their house by himself. In an afternoon, cutting and sanding and sinking every screw by hand, so that the first time Micah came home from the hospital, there would already be a way in that did not require anyone to lift him. He never mentioned it. Colleen found him out there at dusk running his thumb along the edge of a board to make sure there was no splinter that could catch a wheel, and he did not look up. And the only thing he said about the whole catastrophe, that day or any day since, was the thing he had said in the vending room, the thing his son carried into that boardroom like a stone in his pocket. I couldn't do both. He could keep the boy alive or keep the boy whole, in 1 second, with one hand, and there was never a door where he got to do both. And he took the one that let his son grow up, and the machine that forced that second on him, the machine built to make sure no father ever had to stand in that doorway, had been quietly taught to look the other way so a line would move faster and a chart would stay green. Gordon Estes kept his word. He gave the state his resignation and his sworn statement that afternoon, and then he did the harder thing, which was to help the investigators read his own machine against himself, dating every change, naming every meeting, walking them down 2 floors to the drawer with IR 206 in it, and opening it with his own hand. He would testify later that the day the board stood up was the first night in 2 years he slept, and that he did not deserve to, and that he intended to spend whatever was left of his career making restraints for a company that had never heard of him. Honestly, for nothing, until his hands gave out. His granddaughter still rides coasters. He checks her bar himself now, every time, with his hand, the way a mechanic he'd fired used to. Colleen Ordway never worked at that park again, but she went back once, in the fall, after the monitor took over, and she stood in the Peregrine's line with her son beside her in his chair, not to ride because Micah would not ride it, and no one ever asked him to, but to read the new sign at the height marker with her own eyes. She had spent one bad night with a folded letter under a sugar bowl, believing the safe thing was to take the money and stay quiet, and she had been wrong, and she was not a woman who let herself off easy for being wrong. Standing in that line was how she squared it with herself. She held Micah's hand the whole time, and neither of them said anything, because the sign said it for them, in the plain words a mechanic would have used. Renata Doyle was never billed for breaking her agreement. The company's lawyers, it turned out, had no stomach for standing in front of a jury to sue a mother for warning other mothers, and the paper she had signed dissolved the way those papers always do the moment one person is brave enough to test them in daylight. Katie Doyle rides coasters again. She checks her own bar now, with her hand, twice, and rolls her eyes at her mother for checking it a 3rd time. Silas Ordway went back to fixing rides, though not at Kestrel Peak. He took a job at a small county fairground 2 towns over, checking a tilt-a-whirl and a 60-year-old carousel by hand every morning before the gates opened, for less money than he'd made before, and he never once complained about the pay, because he had learned exactly what the alternative to an annoying mechanic costs. He would rather be the most annoying man at a small fair than the quietest one at a big park. Micah goes with him some mornings. He can't reach the high bars from the chair, so his father lifts him the way he used to when the boy was small and wanted to see how the machines worked, and together they check the latches, one at a time, listening for the click. Kestrel Peak reopened that summer under a court-appointed safety monitor, and the Peregrine ran again, eventually, but not until every restraint fault in every tier was set back to the only setting a restraint fault should ever have. Halt the train, clear the line, take the groans, and not until a plain new rule was written into the park's operating license. The kind of rule a mechanic with a clipboard would have signed without changing a word. No fault that concerns a restraint is ever advisory, and no software, and no chart, and no chairman gets to decide that a stop costs too much. They did not name the rule after anyone. Micah asked them to put it on a sign at the front of the Peregrine's line, where the height marker is, where every kid stands to see if they're tall enough, so that a child waiting to ride would read it without ever needing to know his name. Because this is the thing the powerful learn to do, and the thing they count on you not noticing. They don't break the safety. They just switch it off, quietly, in the off-season, in a tier reclassification nobody reads, and they leave the shape of it standing, so the line still believes. A harness still comes down. A light still turns green. It all still looks exactly like protection, right up until the second a child needs it to be real. The click is the promise. When the bar comes down and it clicks, a kid believes the machine has him, and a parent, standing at the gate, believes it too. Kestrel Peak sold that click for a shorter line and a greener chart, and the click was still there. The sound was still there. They had only removed the thing behind it that was supposed to be true. You can reprogram a machine to stop asking whether the child is buckled. You can teach it to log the open bar and roll anyway, and even to smile for the camera. What you cannot reprogram is the man standing at the brake with his own son in car 3 and 1 second to choose. So in the end, they did the only thing left that would keep the chart green. They fired him, and a boy he had traded his own legs to keep alive rolled himself to the front of a room, set a badge down among the water glasses, and made 11 people stand up and finally hear the click that wasn't there. The click is the promise. Check the bar with your hand.